Kia ora everybody, and welcome to our webinar this evening on debt detox. We are going to work on getting you out of what can be a deep, deep hole, right? Once you get in debt, it can feel like you're drowning. It impacts everything, your relationships, how well you sleep. But the good news is that getting that lead weight off your shoulders is possible. It's just that it's not that easy. And so there are some specific things that we can share with you that can help you on that journey, because I promise you that on the other side of being deep in short-term debt, there are brighter things. We just need to climb this mountain and things will get easier. So before I go any further, I do need to give you just a quick disclaimer that the information that you receive in this webinar is for informational purposes only. It's not intended to be or replace independent financial advice. By all means, we want this information to be useful. We just cannot, in a group setting, give you individualized advice. So by all means, seek some if you feel you need some. But also take notes, because there's some useful things, I think, that we can tell you about tonight. So I didn't introduce myself. My name is Nadine Higgins, and I am a financial advisor at Enable Me. So I work with clients day in, day out on their finances to get them from where they are to where they need to be. And most people aren't where they need to be. It's just that when you're in short-term debt, you're a lot further away from where you need to be, and the hill is a bit steeper to get there. So my job is to give you clarity over the situation you're in, and then help you take control and give you clarity as to what it's going to take to get you where you need to go, to build up your confidence, because sometimes getting into debt can really shake those foundations. But also when we set goals, it's to hold you accountable to the things required to achieve those goals. I'm your PT or your cheerleader or both, helping you get there faster. And the ultimate goal is to get you to save more faster, because that can be applied in a multitude of ways once we have got you out of debt. So what we're going to cover tonight: the state of financial stress in New Zealand, because there's a lot of us out there who are feeling that, and some of the ways that society or capitalism makes it so easy to get into debt, but also the importance of your money mindset and your financial habits, because people might think, oh, you can't think yourself rich, but I actually disagree. And I know that your mindset can result in you getting stuck where you are. So we've got to fix your money mindset if it's not the one that's going to serve us on this next part of the journey. And then we get to the strategies. How do we get out of debt? How do we stay out of debt? Because that's the crucial bit, right? No point doing all that effort and then heading back there tomorrow. We're just going to run a very quick poll, and look, this is not going anywhere, it's all confidential. I just want to know, what do you feel like is keeping you stuck in that cycle of short-term debt? Because it can become a cycle, because the interest rates are so high, and so you've got even less money left over, and so then you feel like you need more short-term debt to achieve the things that you did before you got the first one. So is it that you don't know enough, or you feel like you don't know enough? Maybe it's you feel like you don't earn enough, that the interest rates on short-term debt are so high because some of them are astronomical. Is it just that you're like, well, I want to fix this, but I don't know where to start? You're feeling overwhelmed. That's a really common feeling as well. You've maybe got a bit of a spending habit or compulsion, or is it a combination of some or all of the above? So just let us know where your head is at. What is it that's keeping you stuck in the cycle of short-term debt? And if we can take a look at the results that are coming through so far, a lot of you, as I suspected, are saying a combination of all of the above. And that's because, you know, life and finances are complex. There's seldom a single answer, but plenty of people saying it's overwhelming. We're going to try and address some of that overwhelm. The interest rate piece is also really important, so we are going to talk about that. And also feeling like you don't earn enough is a really common one as well. So thank you for answering those questions. However you're feeling right now, though, I would just want to encourage you that what went before is done, right? Yesterday is history, as they say, tomorrow's a mystery. But the point is, we're going to start where you're at. And wherever you're starting from, that's not actually the important bit that I care about. What I care about is where are we going? And so there might be a little bit of resolving the feelings that came with the mistakes or missteps or regrets that came before. But this is where we draw a line in the sand and we step over it and we start the journey to a much more positive financial future. That said, if you're feeling stressed about debt at the moment, that is completely understandable, and it really permeates all facets of your life. So I guess what I want to say is you're not alone. It can feel lonely, but there are lots of people, and the stats bear this out, feeling the same way. 74% of us are stressed about money. I mean, that's 3/4, right? That means the people who aren't stressed are in the minority. 48% don't have a savings goal to work towards, so you sort of feel aimless. 37% feel it impacts their well-being, and that is not surprising because it increases your stress levels and it ruins your sleep and it pervades your relationships. So of course that affects your well-being. There was a 20% increase in hardship cases in 2024 because look, it was a hard year. And the latest data is telling us that almost 500,000 Kiwis are behind on debt payments. They can't keep up with even the minimum payments. So that means that urgent action is required. But look, just because you're not alone and lots of people are in debt doesn't mean that it is helpful. What it signals to me is that we're not in control of the financial situation. We're kind of on this roller coaster where we're just going where the debt repayments tell us to. And that's a horrible feeling because you're just lurching from one disaster to the next. It makes it so much harder to get ahead because we're putting all our energy into just trying to keep our head above water. It can also limit future opportunities because when that great opportunity comes along, you can't grab it because you have no ability to do that when all of your resources and all of your mental capacity is going on debt. And I guess the thing people often overlook is that missed payments do affect your credit score, and that affects a lot of things. It can affect what you'd pay if you were going to get finance, say, on a car. Or even on debt consolidation, the interest rate that you pay can be impacted on, well, do they think you're good for it? And what does your history say as to whether you're good for it? And then it's, can you get a broadband account, a power account? Those kinds of things are credit. And so they want to know, are you good at paying your debts? And so your credit score might indicate that you're not. So we want to fix that. The problem, I think, with society at the moment is that it is so easy to get into debt because they give us lots of options, because getting into debt helps retailers get you to part with your money and as much of it as possible, right? So they want to make it easy and frictionless, and don't worry about that, think about it later, which is what Visa does and Afterpay does. We take the pain out of the purchase, and so more of us click buy now. So buy now, pay later, credit cards, overdrafts, store finance, you name it. It's all designed to make it easier for you to part with your cash, not for you to make it easier for you to afford it. And that is so important to clock. They're not doing it to be helpful. They're doing it to get you to spend money. And I guess the other part of it is that there is absolutely an astronomically high cost of living, which means we don't actually have as much as we might like to spend on the things we like spending money on. And we're also sort of influenced by everybody else that we must have this and we must have that, and you must get your nails done, and how about your eyelashes? And we forget that the people who are telling us those messages are not the ones who are often paying the bill for the things that they're doing and having and holidays that they're experiencing. We'll talk a little bit more about comparison a little bit later. But I think the gist of what I'm getting to is that getting into debt is easy, getting out is hard. Let's clock it, it is hard. And if you haven't done it yet, hopefully that's reassuring to hear. It is hard, and so don't beat yourself up if you haven't managed to do it on your own. But that does not mean that it is impossible. It is possible. It's just not easy. So what are your options to get out of debt and get there as fast as you can? Unfortunately, it's not as simple as do this, and this. The answer will depend on your situation, but there are some common steps. And the very first step is we're going to rip the band-aid off. And by that, I mean we have to confront the situation. We have to open the bills, work out what it is we owe, who we owe it to, what the interest rate is, when is it due, what are the minimum payments. That can be really confronting. That can be an emotional process. And we are going to have to work through the feelings that that throws up, but ignoring the problem isn't going to make those feelings go away. And it is certainly not going to make the debt go away. So this is step numero uno, is let's open all the envelopes, look at all the statements and figure out what is the situation. The next thing we can look at is, as we discussed, interest rates are really high on short-term debt. So what could we do to bring down what we're paying in interest so we've got a little bit more money left over to actually get rid of the debt itself rather than just pay the interest bill? There are two main options here. We could look at a credit card balance transfer, or we could look at debt consolidation, which comes in many different forms. And both of these have potential and both of them have pros and cons. But just in simple terms, a credit card balance transfer is basically transferring the balance of one or a couple of credit cards over to a new credit card with a new provider, because you always have to go to a new provider. And they will offer you, for a short time only, somewhere between probably 6 months and 2 years, either a low interest rate or a zero interest rate on the balance transferred. So that's great, we're paying less interest. However, we have to use that time and that benefit where we're not paying interest to put what we would have been putting towards interest toward getting rid of the debt. The cons, I guess, or the limitations of a balance transfer is that it's only the balance transferred that is for which that interest rate is applicable. So if you make other purchases, they're not going to be at zero interest. So we're putting that card on ice or cutting it up. We are not using it. The time is limited, so we have to use our time well. And, this is an opportunity and it's not one that's easy to repeat time and time and time again. So let's use it. Also, it's only for credit card debt, and you might have any number of other types of debt. This is just credit card to credit card. And there's a qualification process. And so sometimes if you do have really bad credit or your balance is just, whoa, massive, it might not be the option, but it is something to explore because it can reduce some of the pressure of the interest rate bill. One of the other options is debt consolidation. And what does that mean? It just means lumping all of the debts into one. And the advertising would have you believe it's just one easy payment, and it's not quite as romantic as that. But I guess if you're overwhelmed by paying some money to Peter and Paul and Ange and Karen and whoever has lent you money, then putting it into one loan simplifies things and maybe feels a little bit less overwhelming. However, we have to make sure that the overall interest rate that we are consolidating the debts onto is lower than what we were paying before. We don't prioritize the convenience and that feeling of no overwhelm for actually ending up paying more in interest. You also want to know, well, what's the term that they've given me to pay this loan? Because if it's super short and your repayments are really high, well, we might end up defaulting on it and then we've got nowhere and it's ruined our credit score. Whereas if it's super, super long, then we end up in debt for longer, which actually means you end up paying more in interest because you keep it for a long time. And the interest rate can fluctuate, as I said, depending on your credit score. So it's important to find an option that allows you to consolidate your debts that's going to improve the situation. So there's a little bit of analysis that goes into that. That's one way to find more money to put against our debts. The other way is to find out where our money goes, because how often do you find yourself saying, I just don't know where it all goes? Well, we need to find out where it all goes. But what we know about working with thousands of Kiwis over about 17 years is that approximately 15% of everything you spend is being frittered away. And you might enjoy some of that fritter, but it's almost like you don't notice it going and it doesn't really add to your sense of well-being, your joy. And it can be just the common expenses, the small regular ones. It's the takeaways, the coffees, the drinks, the extra trips to the supermarket. It's basically what we put in our gobs, because we do it so frequently that a little bit here and a little bit there just kind of goes by the wayside. Whereas if you look at it over time, it really adds up. And a little bit like the Afterpay and schemes to help you spend more money, the supermarkets want to get as much money out of you as they can. And so that's why there's things at the aisle end and things at the checkout. So you go, oh, that looks appealing. Well, yes, I do need that. And you go home and you find you've got 3 other cans of it already. So we want to go to the supermarket less frequently is what I'm getting at there. But then again, then you might sign up to something on subscription or on membership and then not use it and forget about it. Or, for example, you might be signed up to Netflix, Neon, Apple, Amazon Prime, and you can't possibly watch everything that's on all of those platforms all at once. So maybe we need to cut some. Then if you have a mortgage, often mortgages are structured very inefficiently to maximize the amount you pay in interest. Then there's insurances. A lot of people, I mean, insurance is full of jargon and it's a bit boring to a lot of people. So they take out an insurance policy thinking they're doing the right thing, but then they never look at it again. And so they end up being inefficient and potentially costing you more, or you don't even need it. Then there's the utilities, what you spend on your mobile bill, your broadband bill, your gas, your power. We don't compare them often enough. And we end up paying a lazy tax, which just means that we're only paying more because we're too lazy or haven't found the time to compare the options, shop around and pay less. Then there's bank fees. And then, of course, there is what we spend on interest payments on short-term debt. It sucks up a lot of your income, and paying it certainly isn't making you any happier. So what do we need to do? Let's review the insurances, do it with the assistance of a broker if you need to work out, is this policy even fit for purpose? Am I spending too much? Am I overinsured? Review your utilities. There are lots of online tools to help you do that, like powerswitch.org. You basically put in your situation and your latest power bill and answer a couple of questions, and it will tell you whether you're better off with somebody else. And if you are, why are you being loyal to that company? They don't care about us. You can ask your bank whether they have zero fee accounts, because if you're getting just charged a little bit here and a little bit there, again, it all adds up. The other way we're often charged more by our banks is we go into what's called an unarranged overdraft, which is just that you've got the money, but it's sitting in a different account and that one ran out. And so it's gone into overdraft. So they charge you a premium for the privilege of using the money, even though you've got some other money sitting in a different account. So you can set up an alert to let you know that this account has dipped below this level, and therefore the next automatic payment or direct debit would be dishonored. And you can tell the bank, I don't want unarranged overdrafts. Don't let me go into overdraft unless we've discussed and pre-arranged one. Obviously, you're going to go through and cancel the gym membership if you don't use it, or the Netflix subscription if you've already clocked Netflix. Then we're going to meal plan for the primary purpose of shopping less frequently, because honestly, every time you step foot in those places, you are going to part with more than you intended to spend. So let's just minimize the number of trips to the supermarket. And then another way to help control that spending on everything we eat and drink is to decide how much we're going to spend on those things and put it in one account. And so every time we buy coffee, every time we buy a drink, every time we buy a muffin, it's spent out of that account. And what that does is when it runs out, it tells us you've run out. And so maybe it's eggs on toast or beans and rice for dinner that night until the next week rolls over and you can top up that account, because it will stop you from spending more than you intended to. And maybe you have to find ways to stretch that spending out to next week, or delay that going out for coffee with your friend until next week because we've overspent this week. So it's a good reminder. So we've worked on the expenses side, how much money's going out the door. The next focus is to get more cash coming in the door. And there are loads of things you can look at. The thing I would say is that not all will be possible or practical or appealing. And so it's about going through the list and working out what is applicable to your situation. If you've got a spare room, maybe you could get a boarder or a student. Maybe you've got some skills that you could monetize. You could do some tutoring in music or in maths. You could ask for a pay rise, make a really good case for it, by the way. Don't just say, hey, I need more money. Like, prove why you're worth it. You could sell unused items that you've got sitting under the house or in the back room that you could exchange for even just a small amount of money. It all counts. And there are little ways as well that I wouldn't necessarily call them a side hustle, but they might be earning money outside of your main income, like surveys. And that's something that Tracy, the debt-free diva, did. And there is a great episode of the podcast, Where's My Money, that we're going to put a link to in the chat tonight, that it is worth listening to all of the things that she did. She just did this scattergun approach of, I'm going to get out of debt come hell or high water. I'm going to do it as fast as I can. So what are the ways that I can get more money coming in the door? It's actually a really inspiring story. And it might give you some ideas and also some encouragement that there are ways that aren't super onerous that can help you generate just a little bit here and a little bit there that you can then put toward your debt. So once we've got more money coming in the door, a little less going out the door, and we've looked at how we can reduce the interest costs of our debt, the next step is to talk about, well, how do we apply that? What are the reduction strategies that are going to make the most of all that effort that you have put into trying to generate the cash to improve your situation? And there are two main strategies that we can compare. One is called a snowball debt reduction method, and one is called the avalanche. And they're meant to be evocative for what they are. So the snowball method means that if you've got 5 debts, you'd rank them from lowest to highest balance. And we would start by prioritizing the lowest balance. So we'd put all of the debts on minimum repayments, make sure that we're fulfilling our obligations there. And then however much money we can consistently find to add to that debt, that's going to be our snowball. And that snowball is going to get bigger and bigger as we pay off the debts. So while we've got all 5 debts, say, our snowball might be quite small, but as soon as we've paid off that first debt, or the minimum repayment that was going to that debt can then be added to our snowball so it gets bigger, and we use that to start prioritizing the next smallest debt. And the reason that this is useful is if we start with the small, we get this sense of achievement really quickly that, I'm making a difference. Look, I had 5 debts, now I've got 4, like, let's do this. The potential downside of it, though, is that it can potentially cost you more in interest if one of your big debts happen to be one of your most expensive debts, the one with the higher interest rates. And so in that instance, maybe we would look at the avalanche method. And so the avalanche method looks at the one with the highest interest rate first. And the reason we do that is because that is the one that costs us the most money. And so if we get rid of that, we free up the largest amount of cash to then apply to the next debt. So it potentially minimizes the interest that you will pay if you stick to it. I guess the downside, though, is that big debt, the high interest rate debt, might also be a big debt, which means if it takes you 2 years to get rid of that first debt, that's quite a long time to get that sense of, I am making progress. So it's theoretically a smart option because of the amount of interest you pay. But basically, the method that is going to be the most effective is the one you can stick to. So if this is going to leave you demotivated, grabbing the credit card again and heading out for a bit of retail therapy, well, it's not really achieving what we need it to achieve. And maybe we'd be better off using the snowball method. Then we come to your mindset. And the thing I often say to people is, why do we focus on this? Well, the mindset and the behaviors that got you into debt are not the ones that are going to serve us for the next phase of the journey, which is the bit about getting out and staying out and changing our trajectory. And so what is your money mindset? It's basically just the subconscious attitude you have toward money. And the reason it's important is, no, you don't think yourself rich or poor, but the way you think will influence your actions, and your actions become your habits, and then your habits, the things you do repeatedly, absolutely determine what happens, whether you're getting closer to your goals or further away from them. So in a way, you can think yourself rich or poor. It drives your decisions and behaviors, and that is what determines your progress. So for example, and have a think yourself tonight, what are the stories that you tell yourself about money? Is it that I can't get ahead until I have more money? Sometimes that is true, but more often than not, it's something people tell themselves so they don't have to try. Absolutely, there are cases where you do not have enough to cover the basics, but I see people all the time who have plenty to cover the basics and they're still going backwards. So is it that you tell yourself, I'll never escape this cycle of short-term debt? I know it can feel like that, but if you tell yourself that, what does it encourage you to do? Well, throw your hands up and do nothing. And lastly, well, no, there are so many examples, but this is the example we've got here is people tell themselves, I'm just not good with money. Like, how can I be expected to do better? I'm not good with money. And the thing that these negative stories all have in common is that they are so defeatist. They're telling you why bother? And that's what holds you back. So instead, you can try flipping the narrative, reframing it to be more positive, like, getting ahead will help me have more money. If I can get rid of the debt, I will have more money. I'm working on escaping the cycle of short-term debt. I'm learning to get better with money. Or sometimes I think, even if you're not ready to say something positive, you can just end the sentence with a yet. I'm not good with money yet. And this is entirely a self-promotion, but if you want to listen to the latest episode of the Prosperity Project, which is a podcast I host, in the second half of it, there is a psychologist talking about how to challenge the mental aspect of sticking to your financial goals. And we'll pop the link to that in the chat function as well if you want to go and have a listen. And we'll send you the link tomorrow as well. But it can be really useful to dig into the psychological element of your finances, because honestly, your mind is so powerful. And sometimes when it tells you that it's not achievable, you believe it, even when it's lying to you. It's important to remember, though, that these things often are deep-seated. It might be, I blame our parents, it was something we learned in our childhood or our upbringing, or we've picked up along the way. Sometimes money attitudes are informed by your cultural background or your friends or the things that you've learnt or not learnt. And sometimes it's that we spend so much time looking at what other people are doing and having and buying and seeing that we think we have to emulate what they've got. But you would have heard the saying that comparison is the thief of joy. But it's not just the thief of joy, it's actually the thief of your financial progress, because we do not know what's going on under the hood in other people's financial lives. All we can see is how they spend their money. Not whether they're hitting their goals, not whether they're getting ahead, not whether they've got a safety net and a buffer and a financial plan. And I know from looking under the hood of lots of people's finances is that more often than not, they're screwed. Not quite screwed, but the image they portray is not matched by what's really going on. So the lesson here is try not to compare yourself, because honestly, unless you knew those details, you can't really compare yourself. So what is the answer to some of these challenges? It is not, as I said, just about earning more money. Sometimes it is. That is part of the equation, but it is certainly not the only thing. And what we believe is that you want to get the pillars in place to support your financial success. The foolish man built his house upon the sand and all of that. So the pillars, we think, are you have to build the knowledge. And by that, I don't just mean financial literacy. I mean the knowledge of yourself and your tendencies and your mindset and your strengths and your weaknesses, which we're going to get to. Then it's about knowing the strategy, not just the strategy, but the strategy that's right for you. It's then about inputting the systems that are going to support you when it's hard, when you can't be bothered, when you're tired, when you're over it. And it's the support, the accountability, the person or people or community that's going to tell you, you said you were going to do this and you're going to be better off if you do, like, let's go. And so what we're trying to do is bring all of those things together to support you to do that. So when I say knowledge, I mean it is understanding your psychology, your money psychology, and we don't need a psychology degree to do that, don't worry. But it's about the mindset, it's about your beliefs and your tendencies and the things that trigger you. And emotional triggers can be financial triggers. It's about understanding your situation, which is why we started with ripping the Band-Aid off. And it is then about the options that are right for you to help you get it out of debt. And it's also understanding your why. And you would have heard that a lot when it comes to goal setting, like, what is the impetus or the reason that I need to do things differently? Because you're going to have to come back to that when things get hard. Why is it important to do things differently? Well, what I'm currently doing is not working. What I'm currently doing is making me stressed. What I'm currently doing is making me fight with my spouse, whatever that is. And so I don't want that. And that can be a really powerful why, what you want as much as what you don't want for your future. So let's just very quickly go through some of the things to understand about your money psychology. And this is a broad brush approach. You can be a shopper, a saver, or a plotter. And look, a shopper is someone who derives emotional satisfaction from spending money, not always on themselves. They're not all like, nice hair and nails and fancy clothes. Sometimes they're very, very generous, but more generous than they can afford to be. And I've definitely had clients like that, and we've had to unpack the why and who it was serving and prioritizing yourself. Then there's the saver who gets the reverse, emotional satisfaction from saving. And they have some advantages, but they can also have some other things that hold them back. And the plotter kind of is sometimes one and sometimes the other. And the net effect of that is that they never really get anywhere. And sometimes they can be hard to motivate because they don't necessarily get huge emotional satisfaction from either of those two things. Then we lay over the top of that is, what is your approach to risk? And there's two extremes here. There's the safety warden, who's the kind of the Boy Scout who's always prepared and always pointing out the risks. They probably make a great health and safety officer, but they don't like taking risks, even when the thing they're currently doing is not working. They don't want to do things differently because it doesn't feel safe. And so that can result in you getting stuck in that cycle because you are too scared to do things differently. The adventurer, I often liken them to a gambler, but that all I mean is that they are willing to take a chance and they're up for the adventure. And sometimes that can lead them to great places, and sometimes it can do the reverse because they're always up for it. And then there's the dreamer, and the dreamer often ends up in debt because they kind of just think that the universe will provide. And I don't know about your experience of the universe, but it often doesn't. And you have to get it to provide yourself. And so dreamers are lovely, chilled out people, but they're not dreaming their way to financial success in general. And then is willpower and the things that make you do the things you know you should. So this is based on a US author called Gretchen Rubin, and she's basically thinks that we all fall into one of four categories. The upholder is someone who is like the Harry Hard Out, who's always up at 6 a.m. going for their run or going to the gym. If they say they're going to do it, they will do it. They'll put it in their diary and they'll schedule it or whatever. And then there's the questioner, and the questioner is the person who will do it if it makes sense to them, but they got some questions to get answered. And that's great because they're acquiring knowledge, but they can suffer from analysis paralysis, where they've got so much information that they don't know what to do with it anymore. And so I think the questioner needs information and feedback in order to help propel them on their journey, but they also need someone to give them a little push so that they don't just sit there analyzing 24/7 and never actually do anything. The rebel is kind of like a stereotypical teenager. They don't want to do it because you asked them to. And so a lot of us have a little bit of rebel in us, and a rebel can be motivated by someone thinking they can't or someone thinking they shouldn't, which can lead you to bad places, right? But a rebel is also motivated by the things that align with their values. If it means something to them, they're more likely to do it. But the obliger is actually where the vast majority of us sit. If someone else wants us to do something, we're much more likely to do it. You know, you're the person, if your friend is waiting on the corner to go for a run, even if you don't feel like it, you're out of bed and got your shoes on and you're down there to meet them. Whereas if it was up to you, snooze button. The obliger thrives with accountability. And I think once you know that about yourself, then you can layer that into the best way to get out of debt. And I guess what I'm getting at here is, why is it important to know these things about yourself? Well, knowing these things helps us work out what is the strategy that's going to work for you. It will influence the right debt repayment plan once you know yourself and the things that motivate you and the things that do not. And the next step, I guess, is, actually, I think no matter what your tendency, everyone can level up when they have good systems. And I love this quote from James Clear. He's an author who specializes in habits. We do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So you might have this lofty goal, but unless you have this system to help you get there, this is what you're going to achieve, not this. And so how do you improve your financial systems? Well, we want to make it automated, because what is done automatically is easy. It doesn't require willpower or self-discipline or motivation. We want to automate the outcome we're looking for. That might be moving the debt repayment out of our bank account before you even have a chance to spend it. And you want to make the good habits easy and the less helpful habits, or the bad habits, hard. And this is a quaint example, but you know, if you want to eat healthy, if you have a bowl of fruit on the bench, that makes it much easier to pick up a healthy snack when you need one, versus if you have a jar of lollies on the bench, right? Because you kind of see it and then you go, oh yes, I do feel like something sweet actually, and all of a sudden you've got the lollies. Whereas if you didn't see them, or you didn't even have them in the house and you had to go down to the shop to buy it, that would make it just hard enough that you don't bother. A good system as well, and this is about breaking habits, is to quite literally put your credit card on ice. Sometimes having a credit card is a good emergency backstop, but we don't want to be spending on it regularly. And if you've got debt, you certainly don't want to be adding to it. And so one tip is to put your credit card in the freezer. And that might sound stupid, but then it's not in your wallet when you're out and about. So you can't spend on your credit card if you haven't got it with you. The other thing is, do not share or save your credit card to your internet browser, because that's what makes it too easy to just go add to cart. And before you know it, you're at the checkout. The other system is, we have to be able to see our progress. Otherwise, how do we know whether all that effort we are making is actually working? And so we want to be able to track the money coming in that we're working hard to maximize, and the money going out that we're working hard to minimize, to increase our surplus. So that might be through an app, it might be through a spreadsheet, it might be through going through your bank statements, but we have to be able to see it, because if you can't see it, you can't feel that sense of progress or clock the fact that what you're doing is not working and we need to change it. Now, I mentioned accountability, and I personally find this so powerful. I feel like we all try harder when someone's watching, you know? And I think that's what the boss worries about when you're working from home, right? But that's why we have tools to track what you're doing and Zoom calls, because you want to know that the boss is like, this needs to be done by the end of the day. And you're like, well, if I've got to deliver it by the end of today, I better get onto it. That accountability, though, when it comes to debt repayment, is not just about having someone being like, have you done it? But having someone in your court to say, you can do this. You're not alone in this. You can do it. You just got to keep doing it. And I guess with finances, lots of people don't feel confident, right? And they go, once I feel confident, I'll do better. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. I don't think you should wait to feel confident before you start, because one of the things I think will give you confidence is starting and making a difference. So results give you confidence, whereas inaction, that kind of analysis paralysis, burying your head in the sand, takes it away. So if I would want you to take anything away from tonight, it's that all the knowledge in the world is going to do nothing if you don't do something. You have to take action, and the confidence will come from the results that you see. But I said this at the beginning, and I will say it again, it's not easy. It does take work. But I also think that most of the things worth having and doing in your life take work. And putting the work in will be really satisfying, and it allows you to be the designer of your world, as our friend James Clear says, not merely the consumer of it. You're going to design the kind of life you want once we have climbed this hill of getting out of debt. So before I take some questions, just a couple of really quick takeaways to summarize what I've thrown at you over the past, 45 minutes. We start with getting a clear understanding of the situation. Ignorance is not bliss when it comes to debt. We need to know exactly what we're facing so we can figure out how to face it. And then we're going to assess the ways to reduce the interest costs if we can, because that's going to give us some immediate wins and give us more money to put towards reducing the actual debt and not just paying the interest. We're going to find the places that we are frittering money. We're going to stop paying that lazy tax. We're going to raise cash to get more money coming in the door in any way that is possible. And we're going to boost how much is left over, your surplus, because then we can apply that to the debt reduction strategies. But before we choose a strategy, we're going to work a little bit on understanding you and reframing the narrative to set you up for the debt reduction journey. And then we think about, well, based on what I know about myself, what is the method that is really going to take me to this debt-free future? We're going to build systems that help support the right behaviors or disincentivize the ones that don't help us. And we're going to utilize accountability and support, because it's not easy, and it's not designed to be easy because people profit from you being in debt. And last of all, doing nothing is not an option. That is not the way forward. That doesn't improve anything. Nothing comes of nothing, as they say. And so one of the things I think that could be really helpful, and I know it's helpful because I've been part of helping design it, and I think that it has the potential to be a really powerful tool, is that MoneyFit.me, we have designed a debt masterclass. It's a 10-week course, because what we know is it takes on average 66 days to form a habit. And so it's a 10-week course, that's 70 days, right? And we are going to tackle the debt. We're going to reset your financial mindset. We're going to help you understand what we're facing and how to manage it and how to get out of it. There's going to be a personalized spending plan. There are some fantastic tools in there that are going to help you work out and then apply those debt reduction strategies once you've selected the right one for you. It's going to help you create a positive relationship with money. It's going to build your knowledge about yourself and about financial matters so that you can feel empowered to live life differently. And it's going to give you weekly encouragement, actionable tasks, and lots of proven strategies that are going to help you build much better habits. So I'm evangelical about this for a reason. I think it's really good. And if you are feeling like I have to take action, I would just encourage you to make the most of this offer. So if you scan the QR code on your screen and click the button enroll now, one-time payment, and then sign up, if you use the code on your screen, debt-free-100, that will give you $100 off this course. And so this is limited to the first 100 customers. And I know there are lots of people who are in this situation, but we had to set the limit somewhere. So I would just encourage you to get in as fast as you can and make the most of it, because the masterclass is really powerful. The tools are powerful, and the potential to change your life is really powerful. And I don't believe I'm overstating it when I say that, because the feeling of having the burden of debt released from your shoulders is life-changing. And I would love for you to be able to experience that, because as I said at the beginning, so much opportunity lies on the other side of short-term debt. We just got to get you there first. So I'm going to take a breath and have a drink of water. If you have a question, I would just encourage you to put it in the Q&A box if you haven't already. We've had some that have been sent in prior when you registered for this webinar. So we've got some ready to go to get the ball rolling. But if you have one, please pop it in the Q&A box. I'll do my very best to answer it. And of course, we will be in touch with the link to this webinar in the coming days. And so you can always reach out to us if you have more questions about how MoneyFit works, how the courses work, and how we can help. So what have we got question-wise?
We've got some great questions that were submitted. The first question is, do you think you need to be debt-free before looking at financing for a house?
Not necessarily. However, it will count against you, because what the bank is wanting to look at is this person good for it if I'm going to lend them a whole heap of money? And the other thing is they are looking at, can you afford to service the loan? And so if you're spending lots of money on servicing the debt, then you've got less left over to service the mortgage on a house. And so it's going to limit how much they will let you borrow. So we'd need to do a bit of an analysis as to which is right. Do we focus on the debt to get it gone, or do we just get it under control and then we start the process of searching for the house? I've just actually seen in the chat a really interesting question coming from Julia. Don't you think that the $199 for the course would be better spent on the debt? Great question. And the answer is, sometimes you have to invest in the tools you need that are right for the journey. And if you haven't got out of debt on your own, it's because it's complex and it's hard. And so that does mean that we need the arsenal and the support and the knowledge to make a difference. So yes, it's spending money that could be going against the debt, but do you know what's going to cost you more long term? That's staying in debt. And so this is an investment in doing things differently. I hope that answers that question.
Great. We've got another question. Will having multiple accounts help with creating a good financial system?
It can do, although I have seen people with extreme levels. You know, they've got a bucket or an account for everything, and they really don't know overall whether they're coming or going. And so I think keep it simple is my rationale. I would say we want one for all the regular expenses. We want another to know that all of our fixed expenses that keep a roof over our head and the lights on, and probably the broadband on to keep the kids happy, are accounted for. And then we need to be saving, whatever that looks like, whether it's debt reduction, actual saving, paying off the mortgage. We need to have some sort of system set up to prioritize that.
Another question is, what are some practical tips for helping kids understand the concept of money?
Well, look, lots of people will tell you about the spend, save, give jars and whether they should be doing pocket money for chores, or there should be set chores that are free and only pocket money for those over and above that. And look, all of those things can be helpful. But the number one thing is you can set the example. And that can be the hardest thing to do. But I think the reality is with kids is they aren't just going to do what you tell them to do. They're going to do what they see you doing. Then look, my son is not even 18 months old yet, and I can already see him copying the things that I do. They are watching us. And so I think the number one thing you can do is to get your own house in order and show them the money behaviors that are going to serve them. And that will help them learn it the easy way rather than maybe the hard way that you might have had to learn it.
And then someone asked, do you have any tips on steps I can take for setting financial goals in 2025?
Yeah, and actually, that episode of the Prosperity Project that I mentioned and that we put the link in is actually entirely geared around setting goals. We've talked to Hannah McQueen, the founder of Enable Me, and also the psychologist Jackie McGuire about all aspects of goal setting. But what I took from that is we have to make sure we have a strategy in place to support the goal. Because plucking something out of the air and saying, I want to do this year, and not having all of the little steps along the way to get there is kind of just, well, I just don't think it's going to get you there, because we haven't figured out the route. We've figured out the destination, but not the route. And that's the key bit, is we've got to know, well, what are the pit stops along the way? Where am I going to get fuel? Do I turn left or right? We have to know those smaller bite-sized pieces. And those are the bits that aren't so overwhelming as well. And I think reframing the narrative is actually really important, because you don't want to find that one little tiny thing that goes wrong results in you giving up. You know, it's the old, if you're on a diet and you eat one biscuit and you're like, stuff it, I've ruined the diet, let's eat the packet. And that's really common. It's like this all or nothing approach. I think we need to tell ourselves, look, I've stuffed up. Mistakes are normal. I've learnt from this, rather than catastrophizing that the whole plan has to go out the window. I really do think that there is so much of mindset and psychology in with finances. And so if you can get the two to work together, I think you'll be away laughing.
Okay, last question, which is a combination of two questions that was asked in the Q&A box. It's someone is asking, how would you advise to navigate if you and your partner have different views on saving, paying off debt, or investing? They're asking if you have any tips on how to get buy-in from a spouse who likes to spend.
Do you know what? It's really common in a partnership that you have different money personalities, different attitudes to risk, and it is a source of a lot of conflict. And look, we don't tend to have those conversations when we're dating. You know, it's not in your Tinder profile, like, I am a spender. And so everyone's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I need to be on board with that. I think sometimes an outsider's perspective can be really helpful, because sometimes when you suggest that your partner shouldn't spend, they take that as some sort of attack, or that you're limiting their freedom. The other thing I would suggest is to, rather than agree first on the method, like we have to stop spending so much money, let's agree on the dream or the goal. Because once we know what it is we're aiming for, maybe it's easier to get the buy-in as to what's required. Whereas if you do it the other way around, you're kind of focusing on the hard bit first rather than the exciting bit. And I think it's important to allow everyone in the relationship to have a couple of things that they can spend money on that bring them joy. And we call them the non-negotiables. Because if you cut everything out of your life that makes you happy, you will never stick to it. You will be miserable, and it will probably send you back in the other direction. And it will make you resent your partner, because they're the one who said, you must not. So those would be the three things that I would suggest. It is a tricky one. But it can be navigated. And just because you are a spender doesn't mean you're a lost cause, and just because you're a saver doesn't mean you're a saint. There is a middle ground that can be found, and financial conflict is so common, but it can also be resolved. You can be on the same team, you just have to be dreaming about the same things. We can figure out how to get there after that.
Thanks.
So
Oh,
I think that was the final question, was it, Amelia?
yeah, I'll leave you to close up.
So I really appreciate your attention tonight. I know that there was a lot of information in there, but I hope it was helpful information. And if we can be useful to you, please make the most of that discount on the debt-free course. I think it would be an investment in getting rid of the debt and all of the associated stresses. So thank you for your time tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.